Hello everyone, my name is Danielle Brown. Today I will be discussing Chapter 5 from Fostering Self-Regulated Learning through ICT. This chapter is written by Rylan Egan and Mingming Zhao, and it focuses on the relationship between self-regulated text-based learning and metacognitive monitoring and control. This presentation will begin with a discussion of trichotomous metacomprehension calibration. From there, the three categories of metacomprehension calibration will be explained. These are assessment calibration, strategic calibration, and internal calibration. Scenarios will be provided for each type of metacomprehensive calibration to more deeply understand the calibration types and to understand how instructors can collect and use trace data to improve student metacomprehension calibration by using a software called NStudy. In this chapter, Egan and Zhao build on the research of educational psychologist Stephanie Peschel. The pair explain that learners use metacomprehension calibration to adjust judgments of their learning as they move through study sessions. Following Peschel's framework, Egan and Zhao describe three categories of metacomprehension calibration. Each of these contributes to an individual's overall ability to differentiate between the perception of what they know versus what they actually know. Egan and Zhao refer to the three distinct categories of metacomprehension calibration as trichotomous calibration. These three categories of calibration are assessment calibration, strategic calibration, and internal calibration. The first category of metacomprehensive calibration is assessment calibration. Assessment calibration is the learner's ability to make predictions about the qualities of an assessment and how the prediction compares to the actual qualities of the assessment. These qualities include elements like depth, complexity, and coverage. To have high assessment calibrations, learners must be skilled in identifying clues that indicate how an assessment is formatted and the complexity of the assessment's questions. Now let's look at our initial scenario, which exemplifies how NStudy can be used to track and adjust student assessment calibration. Each of the scenarios explored in this presentation will be centered around Kathy. Kathy is a second-year undergraduate student who is enrolled in an educational psychology course through her university. Let's go ahead and look at scenario 1. Kathy's educational psychology professor asked for her class to use a software called NStudy to study a chapter on cognitive development. Kathy's professor provides a learning objective for the students. This learning objective asks for students to be able to both understand and apply the theoretical stages of cognitive development. When Kathy begins her study of cognitive development, she uses NStudy's tagging tool to mark up the assigned chapter. Into her study, Kathy comes across a task where she has to form a short answer question based off the objective that was provided by her professor. Remember though, the objective provided by Kathy's professor asked the students to be able to both understand and apply the theoretical stages of cognitive development. Kathy comes up with a short answer question that asks, what are the 4 stages of cognitive development according to Piaget? After inputting her short answer question, Kathy is faced with a follow-up task. This task asks Kathy to select one of the 3 questions provided by her professor that best resembles the learning objective. Kathy selects the option that most closely resembles the question that she came up with. Kathy would later come to find out that the actual question that her professor came up with that she should have selected asked, according to Piaget, what typical cognitive development characteristics would a 2-year-old boy display and why? Based on this data that we've collected from NStudy, we know that Kathy has a low assessment calibration. But how exactly do we know this? To better understand Kathy's struggle with assessment calibration, let's go ahead and take a deeper look using Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy consists of 6 different levels, and as we move up each level towards the top of the pyramid, the tasks associated with each level become more complex. At the very bottom is the identify complexity level. At this level, we're expecting for the learner to be able to recall information. The very next level of Bloom's taxonomy is the understand level. At this complexity level, the learner should be able to understand the content. They should be able to go beyond just identifying it and retrieving it from their memory and actually be able to explain the content. At the next level of Bloom's taxonomy is the apply level. In this level, we can expect the learner to be able to take information and apply it to various situations. From there, we have the analyze level, and then we have the evaluate level. And finally, at the very top of the pyramid, we have the create complexity level, which Bloom's taxonomy considers to be the most complex of all the tasks here. Now that we have a general understanding of how Bloom's taxonomy works and how we go through different complexity levels, let's go ahead and look again at the question that Kathy came up with. The question that Kathy came up with says, what are the 4 stages of cognitive development according to Piaget? Let's really think about what Kathy's question is asking here. Her question, in its essence, is asking for the learner to recall information. That is, to participate at the identify level of Bloom's taxonomy. When we think about the objective that her professor had, that was a different objective entirely. Her professor was not asking for Kathy's class to be able to identify. Instead, it was asking for something more, something complex, or more complex than identifying anyway. Kathy's professor's question that she formed, that should have been the question that Kathy selected, was, according to Piaget, what typical cognitive development characteristics would a 2-year-old boy display and why? There are 2 levels of complexity that are present in this question. The first part of the question asks, what would they display? What would this 2-year-old boy display? This connects to the apply portion of Bloom's taxonomy. Then it follows up with why. This asks for the learner to be able to show their understanding. So if we're considering Kathy's assessment calibration here, because she was only able to come up with an identify question, but her professor's objective was asking for her to be able to apply and understand information, it makes sense that Kathy has a lower assessment calibration level. The good news, though, is that Kathy was able to get with her professor. Her professor provided feedback based off the end study program, and Kathy was able to heighten or raise or increase, however you want to call it, her assessment calibration level. The next type of meta-comprehension calibration is strategic calibration, which is the difference between strategies that are used to prepare for assessments and the strategies that would be the most appropriate to prepare for the assessment based on things like the assessment's complexity of items or the assessment's learning goals. With that, we're going to go ahead and move on to scenario number 2. So in scenario 2, Kathy begins studying a new chapter. Again, it's for her educational psychology class. Just like in the first scenario, Kathy is using end study to create and select the questions that she believes are most likely to be tested. However, now she is tasked with predicting her performance for each item. She completes a quiz that's provided by her professor, and this quiz is made up of different questions. All the different items on this quiz are of various complexity. So Kathy gets her quiz results returned and she notices something. She notices a trend. Even though she was able to answer the questions that matched up to the complexities that she expected, again with complexities I'm referring to Bloom's taxonomy levels, she was not able to perform well on questions where she couldn't predict a complexity or it wasn't a complexity that she expected. At this point, Kathy has a low strategic calibration. This is not the end for Kathy, however. Kathy is able to use this information to her advantage. Kathy is able to recognize that her current study strategy is not conducive to how complex these new quiz questions are. What does Kathy do then? She adapts. She changes her strategy. So first of all, like in the beginning, she's highlighting. She's only highlighting. And that might be great when she's looking at identification level questions, right? But then she starts to adapt her strategy to kind of match up with her more complex questions that she's going to begin to expect. So she begins to use different study strategies within the Study software. So things like concept mapping, things like text linking. With this, Kathy's strategic calibration significantly improves. That is because she recognized the need to shift her strategies, and she effectively did that. The last of the three meta-comprehension calibration categories that we will be discussing in this presentation is internal calibration. Internal calibration is defined as the accuracy between how a learner believes they will perform versus how they actually end up performing. To gain more insight on internal calibration, let's go ahead and head over to scenario number 3. As Kathy studies each of the chapters, she uses a judgment slider that allows for her to predict performance in each of the questions. The software study records Kathy's predictions of her assessment items, as well as the actual assessment items, her future assessment performance judgments, and her actual performance on the assessment. By relating Kathy's judgments with her performance on items at predicted levels of complexity, researchers are able to calculate item-specific internal calibration. This procedure is repeated several times, and that provides data that can be used to help Kathy to adjust her assessment expectations appropriately. And over time, tracking these changes allows for researchers to calculate Kathy's recursive internal calibration. This presentation focused on the utilization of trace methodology to evaluate learners' meta-comprehension calibration. For this discussion, I would like for you all to reflect upon a situation in which you've had to make adjustments to your own studying practices, whether that was done through internal, strategic, or assessment calibration. Describe the steps you took and what factors encouraged you to make the adjustments that you did. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. I know I went a little bit over time, but there was a lot of information from that article, and I wanted to make sure I shared the most important parts. I hope that you all have a wonderful day and happy discussing.